So, welcome to another edition of the Cross and Pen. Today, what I'm going to talk about a little bit is knowing the will of God. That is, figuring out what God wants you to do with your life. And it's something that is perpetual in that even if you figure out what you're supposed to do, you're going to transition through many stages in your life. And when you're young, maybe you're out being a missionary because you feel like God's leading you to go be a missionary. So you're going to go be a missionary. Some people go and they're missionaries for 20, 30, 40 years, their entire lives. But other folks outgrow some of that and transition. Maybe while they're in college, they're engaged in ministry in a school program, maybe a music program, some sort of outreach. But then they graduate from college and they go into a career and a profession, and they struggle to figure out what the next step is. What does God want me to do? And I've struggled with that myself. I've gone through many iterations of my life. Maybe chapters of my life would be a good way to put it. Uh, and you look back and you can kind of connect the dots and say, oh well, I needed to do this to do that, and then this prepared me for that next step. Then that next step led me to a different place and so forth. And then you say, well, here's where I am now. So if I'm here now, well, I kind of know what I'm supposed to be doing now. But we're very forward looking in our society. We're always looking down the road. We're always saying, well, what's the next thing? What does God want me to do next? Well, maybe there's no next. Maybe what you're doing now is what he wants you to keep on doing. Or maybe what he wants you to do is so obvious that you can't believe it's right in front of you. And you're thinking, well, this can't be what it is. This can't be what he wants. It's too obvious. Or what we often do, we're all guilty of this. God wants us to do something we don't want to do. Jesus dealt with that. Prayed to his Father before he was crucified, before he was arrested. He said, if it be your will, take this cup from me. So it's very human to not necessarily want to do the will of God per se. And it's also difficult to try to figure out what God wants you to do. And I've struggled with that a lot my whole life. I've looked back and I've thought that I would get to a place in my life, sort of a plateau, where I would arrive as a Christian. And I would say, okay, here I am. I've been through all this stuff, good and bad. It's prepared me for where I am now. And now I can kind of just step into that role and be that well-rounded Christian because I've got all that experience behind me. Again, both good and bad. All the things you shouldn't do, the things that where you erred and you kind of wandered off course. All those things. I thought, well, I'm prepared now. And then you get to that plateau and you realize you're not really as prepared as you think you are. But at the same time, you're also prepared. You're also prepared beyond what you realize. And so, what I've learned about discovering the will of God is, number one, know yourself. What are the things that interest you? And the reason that's important is because those things that interest you, those talents, those gifts, those skills, are given to you by God. And I've often wondered, if you look at an artist, you look at a musician, look at anybody with a gift that you can see that way. And I've often wondered, is that person happy with that gift? Do they relish that every day? Do they get up and say, yes, I'm just so happy I have this gift? Or is it a burden? Do they see it that way? And, I've thought about that because if we're honest, we look at people who can do things that we can't. Musicians come to mind for me. I like music. I like to dabble with a guitar, but I never really had the time and the desire to just become really, really good. And I think even if I had the time, I still wouldn't spend the time to do that. If I just didn't have to work for the rest of my life, I wouldn't just pick up the guitar and say, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to master this. But some folks are born with a gift. Some folks just dedicate their time and their passion. It becomes it's part of who they are. And I think there's some of that in all of us. We all kind of have those things we gravitate toward. So if you have something in you, a skill set, a desire, a passion, and an ability, that's the place to start. Because God gave you that ability. He gave you that gift. And it could be something very simple. You could have the gift of encouragement. You could be a very encouraging person. You could be a comforting person. And you could volunteer. You could work with people in some way, shape, or form. There's so many things that you can do just by having that ability. When I was in the hospital recently for my skydiving injury with my ankle, met a ton of just incredible people who had compassion. They didn't know me, I didn't know them. We quickly built rapport, and they took great care of me. And if their only talent was just to provide that bit of compassion to me, to allay my fears, to just make me feel at ease, then that's a huge talent. That's huge. I mean, that's a huge gift to be able to do that. And so, we all have something, and it may not be prominent. It may not be something where you're going to go and hang it on a wall, or put it in a bookstore, or listen to it on the radio, or anything like that. It may not be something that pronounced. But we're called to serve God in our daily lives. And I think a lot of times we overcomplicate what that means. Every day we make choices of how we spend our time. And I think what's important, and I have learned, is to really be intentional how you spend your time. Are you spending your time using the gift that God gave you? Or are you spending your time doing something else? And it's not to say that you can't sit, watch a movie, and read a book. All those things are great. But if you have a gift, if you have a skill set, if you have something that you know God's given you, and here's a hint to figure it out. What are you passionate about? If you're passionate about something, where your passion is, probably where your gift is. The two usually go hand in hand. But if you have that, it's something that should be part of your daily life, regardless of what it is. I mean, it could be athletic ability. It doesn't matter. It should be part of your daily life. And the reason that's important is because if you don't use it, it just gets wasted. And time passes, and it never gets developed. But if you have something, whatever that something is, you should try to use it every day. If it's writing, you should write every day. If it's painting, paint every day. Sculpting, sculpt every day. If it's showing love and kindness as a teacher to children, then you should be doing that every day. If it's showing compassion to the elderly or the sick, if it's serving others, whatever the case may be, you should practice that every day. And if you do that, you're going to be on track to knowing God's will, or at least to following His will. Now, He may open doors, He may lead you places. That's all part of it. But I think the common thread that I've seen throughout my life is the will of God has always related back to what I'm able to do. Now, part of what I'm able to do is what I know I'm able to do. And then the other part of that is what God says, no, I know you're capable of more. And that's usually where we kind of get into trouble, because God wants us to go do something we don't want to do, and we're going, no. You don't understand. Like, I'm in my comfort zone, and God goes, yeah, I know you're in your comfort zone, and you need to get out of that comfort zone. And so that is usually when we start saying, "Yeah, I wish I knew God's will for my life." What we really mean is, we wish God's will aligned with our will. I mean, that would be great. That would be awesome. That's what we really want, if we're honest about it. But a lot of times that isn't the way it goes. But what you can do is use the gifts you have. God will open doors. God will develop you through those things that you don't think you can do. Because you see, there's a great phrase that says, comfort zones are great, but nothing grows there. True statement. Nobody has ever gotten better at anything or succeeded without getting out of their comfort zone. Think about the disciples. These are 12 ordinary guys. These are not scholars. These are not professors, theologians. Nope. They're just run-of-the-mill, like your working blue-collar class kind of guys. And Jesus is coming along basically recruiting them for Congress, saying, hey, come with me, we're going to go change the world. And they're thinking, I don't have the skill set for this. Now, they had skill sets that were useful, but like the phrase goes, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Okay, that sounds good, but it's true. You'll go through experiences and grow and develop in your life. Now, as Americans, we're very forward-looking. Everything we do is in the future. We're planning 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. Planning for retirement, planning vacations, planning for Christmas, we're planning. That's good. Planning's good. However, if you don't stop and look back to see where you were, to see what God has led you through, and look at your own development. It's not vain to look at that honestly and see, wow, I've come a long way. Make an honest assessment, because if you're growing as a person, if God is developing you, you need to pay attention to that. How has he developed you? Look at where you've come. Do you know more about the Bible today than you did 2 years ago? That's development. Have you gone through certain trials that you didn't think you'd be able to get through? Or there have been experiences that you've had that have just caused you to have a deeper faith? All those things are important, but you won't notice them unless you look back. If you look back, it's like connect the dots. You can just go, oh, look. And you can see how necessary each one of those steps was, how necessary each one of those dots was. You can see that. So it's important, if you want to know the will of God, to do a couple things. First one is know what you're passionate about, what interests you. And most people, that's a no-brainer, that you should know that. The second is stop and look back. Look back at your life. Look where you've been. Look at your spiritual growth. Look at your personal growth. And ask yourself, well, what has all that prepared me for? Obviously, it's prepared you for where you are now, which could be a clue as to where the next step is. And don't get fixated on that. That next step could be years away, could be days away. Doesn't matter. Look at those steps that you took in your journey to get to where you are and appreciate them. Learn from them, study them, and use them as tools to continue your personal development. Because as you develop, what you'll do, what you'll do is you'll align yourself with God's will over time if you do that. So that's my tips on how to know the will of God for your life. We'll see you next time on The Cross and Pen.